The desert held its breath. Morning had not yet burned the haze off the ridgelines, and everything was still colored in washed-out grays and soft gold. Riley moved without sound on the lip of the overlook, her boots whispering against sun-cracked stone. The wind had not yet picked up, but the heat already curled faintly off the distant sand flats. She unfolded a canvas mat, laid her rifle across it, and began her ritual. Range card, wind flags, scope, each item placed in order, each action executed like a held breath. Below her, nearly a mile out, the convoy route snaked along the edge of a dry riverbed. She had marked the danger zones the night before, not with markers or digital overlays, but in her head. Choke points, high ground, drift patterns in the sand that could hide shallow-buried charges. None of it was new. It just had to be watched. She lowered herself onto her belly and settled behind the rifle. Her cheek touched the stock. Her eyes adjusted through the scope. The world narrowed to angles, contrast, and stillness. The sun was beginning to rise behind her, creeping across the valley in a slow, deliberate crawl. Far to the south, behind layered heat, shimmer and distant haze, rotors waited. At forward operating base Merritt, Mia stood next to her Apache, one boot braced against the skid, clipboard resting on her thigh. She worked through the checklist while her co-pilot watched the cloudless sky. Mia said nothing. Her fingers moved quickly, checking diagnostics, confirming fuel, reviewing standby ordnance. The Hellfires were already mounted. Chain gun rounds were stowed and sealed. Her bird was quiet now, still resting beneath the sheltering structure of canvas netting and maintenance scaffolds. She would not remain that way. They had been told to hold readiness at 100.0. Airspace was clear, no active engagements, no green light yet. But Mia knew the patterns. The longer a route stayed quiet, the more likely someone was waiting to break it. She flipped the final switch and gave a small nod toward her co-pilot, who moved to the rear to check the harness lines one more time. Mia stepped back and looked toward the horizon. From where she stood, she could see nothing but light bouncing off tan earth and steel shadows. But she knew someone was already out there, watching, timing, waiting for someone to blink first. Up on the ridge, Riley adjusted her wind flag by 1/2 inch. It caught the faintest change in air current and flickered once, then fell still. She exhaled slowly, then tucked her gloved hand beneath her chest, keeping her elbow off the warm stone. The valley below remained empty. No dust trails, no movement. The route was scheduled for midday. Her job was not to count vehicles. It was to find things that did not belong. A hawk glided overhead. Its shadow passed across the scope's lens for a fraction of a second, then disappeared. Riley blinked once and returned to her scan. Her radio sat silent beside her. The earpiece remained in, but the net had not been active since dawn. That was fine. Quiet meant nothing had gone wrong yet. The longer nothing happened, the more disciplined she needed to stay. It was too easy to relax, to shift her body weight, to allow her vision to drift or her heartbeat to outpace her breath. She had trained long enough to know that the kill shot didn't come at the start of a fight. It came 30 seconds before anyone realized it had begun. Mia stood beneath her Apache's rotor disc and wiped a line of dust from the side of the cockpit glass with her sleeve. The sun was angling higher now, catching the tail of the aircraft and sending thin lines of shadow across the tarmac. Her bird was primed, armed, and quiet. The crew chief called something out from the maintenance tent. Mia lifted one hand without speaking, a simple acknowledgement, then checked the radio frequency and sat down on the shaded bench by the gear locker. Inside the cockpit, all systems were in standby. The HUD glowed faint green. The crosshairs were steady. The digital map shimmered with static overlay. No active movements reported, but she watched it anyway. The last time they'd flown this route, they had done it with night optics and a suppressor team on the ground. She remembered the tension in that last call, the dry stutter of the sniper's breathing over comms just before she opened fire. Mia didn't know who would be on the ground today, but she didn't need names. She only needed calm instructions, proper target marks, and clear airspace to fly. Riley lowered her scope, blinked against the light, and then adjusted the lens cap half shut. She rolled her shoulders once, quietly, then settled her eye back into position. She was in place. Her line of sight was clear. She waited for the sound of approaching engines, for the shift in wind, for any signal that something had begun. Neither woman spoke. Neither moved without purpose. On opposite ends of the desert, both had already prepared for a fight that had not yet started. One in the dirt, one in the sky, each waiting for a call they hadn't heard before but would know when it came. The first sign was movement, just a flicker of shadow against the far ridge, too fast for any desert animal and too slow for wind-blown debris. Riley adjusted her scope 2 degrees west, tracking the outline as it shifted along the rocks above the convoy route. Then came the glint of glass. Possibly a scope. More likely a rangefinder. It was enough. The first rocket-propelled grenade launched from high on the southern face, a streak of smoke that hit short, punching dust and shattered gravel into the air. Seconds later, machine gun fire erupted from both sides of the valley. It echoed in uneven bursts, bouncing off stone and sand, building a chaotic rhythm. Riley didn't flinch. She fired her first round before the dust had settled, sent her mass into a crouched figure holding a spotting scope. The man dropped backward without a sound, his equipment tumbling down the rocks beside him. She rotated her bolt, adjusted her position by 2 inches, and zeroed in on the machine gun nest now opening up near the bend in the route. Convoy vehicles below began to scatter into defensive positions. Marines dismounted quickly, returning fire toward the ridgelines, but they were pinned. Another RPG flew over the valley, this one slamming into a supply truck and igniting a brief, hot flame. Riley worked her position without wasted motion. She engaged the RPG team next, waiting for them to reload before dropping the gunner with a single shot. The assistant scrambled to take over, and she put him down with the next. The third round hit the ground near the launcher, making it clear that cover would not save them. Her rifle clicked empty. She swapped magazines, only 2 left in her kit. That was not good. From her position, she had near-complete visual control of the kill zone, but now they had spotted her. She heard a crack against the rock near her side, the sharp snap of return fire closing in on her hide. Someone had seen the shimmer from her lens or track the arc of her rifle. Either way, she was no longer invisible. She reached for the radio. Echo 1 to control. Ambush at grid 83 by 21. Multiple contacts. High ground entrenchment. Convoy is pinned. I am engaged and unable to reposition. Requesting air support. The reply came 2 seconds later, clipped and professional. Control to Echo 1. Air is in standby. Confirming Apache coverage. Standby for Viper 2. Riley reloaded with practiced calm. She kept her breathing slow, letting the chaos below pass through her. Dust and wind swirled upward now, kicked by both explosions and panicked movement. Another vehicle caught fire. She adjusted her angle and marked a ridge runner preparing to lob a grenade toward one of the parked troop carriers. Her shot landed just above the knee, folding him immediately. She chambered again. Time was thinning. At the forward airstrip, Mia was already moving. The call had reached her headset less than 10 seconds before she climbed into the cockpit. Her co-pilot swung into the left seat beside her without speaking. Both moved through the startup sequence without commentary. Battery switch. Fuel. Weapon systems on standby. Engine spool confirmed. Rotor brake released. Control. This is Viper 2. We are hot and lifting. ETA 7 minutes to grid 83 by 21, holding attack pattern low and fast. Copy. Viper 2. Echo 1 is on comms. Be advised. Friendlies in close contact. Mia pulled her helmet down, eyes narrowing behind the HUD as the Apache began to lift. The rotors cut through the dry morning air, sending a burst of dust rolling across the concrete. She banked slightly east and brought the aircraft over the outer wall, scanning the terrain ahead. The ridgelines were jagged, too narrow for easy ingress. She would need to stay low until she had direct line of sight. Echo 1. This is Viper 2. En route to your position. Be advised, we are loaded and green. Mark targets as needed. Riley didn't shift her focus. Copy. Viper 2. Ridge cresting south of the dry wash. I've got 5 infantry dug in with crew served, marked by flare smoke. Additional contact north side. Closer RPGs and 1 spotter team moving to flank. I can't reposition. Understood. We'll arrive on your right flank. Paint your targets and I'll do the rest. Copy. Stay wide until the first strike. They're tracking optics. Mia rolled the Apache through a shallow curve, then dropped altitude to follow the edge of a rock shelf. Dust began trailing her rotors as she pressed forward. The landscape shimmered with heat, the hard lines of the valley broken by pockets of smoke from burning vehicles below. Riley marked her first position with an IR pointer through the scope. She blinked dust from her eyes as a shot cracked past her. Too close. She returned fire without changing her breathing, one hand steady on the bolt. Mia saw the pointer on her HUD and locked in a fire control solution. She spoke once to her co-pilot. Target 1 locked. Stand by on chain gun. Confirm splash. A burst of fire lit the top of the southern ridge. The gun nest evaporated in flame and stone. Riley saw the debris fly sideways from the impact and followed up by tagging the flank team now scrambling toward the lower slope. Another IR mark. Another burst from above. A voice in Riley's ear cut through the static. Good marks. Keep them coming. She didn't reply. She just kept marking. The air was alive with sand and echoes. Above her, the Apache began circling. Below, the convoy started moving again, fanning outward into defensive patterns. The ambush had broken shape, but it hadn't collapsed. Riley swapped magazines again. The one in her hand held just 3 rounds. She looked at it for a moment, then returned to position. This wasn't finished, but now, she wasn't alone. Riley pressed her body tighter against the slope, adjusting her rifle's angle by the width of 2 fingers. The rock beneath her was warm now, not from the sun, but from the fire echoing across the valley. Her last clean magazine sat already chambered. 3 rounds remained. Another one waited in the pouch by her elbow. But that was it. Anything past that would mean reaching into the emergency strip, 5 loose rounds wrapped in cloth and stashed beside her radio. She didn't want to use those unless everything else had failed. The air felt closer now, heavy with smoke and heat and noise. She could hear movement again, down in the lower rock shelf. It wasn't random. They were feeling their way in, coordinated, working angles. One team had likely spotted her flash earlier and was now trying to flank high. Another was working low, slipping through the brush and stone debris. She rotated slightly, careful not to disturb the wind flag still pinned on the edge. A soft scrape behind her drew her attention, a boot against rock, quickly stilled. She reached for a small stone and flicked it in the opposite direction, letting it bounce once, then twice. A pause, then movement in the wrong direction. That would buy her 10 seconds. The radio crackled. Echo 1. This is Viper 2. Still 3 minutes out. Terrain is thick. Stay with me. Riley's voice was calm when she responded. Copy. Viper 2. Right flank is hunting. Left flank holding. If they move again, I'll engage. She let the mic fall back against her vest. She didn't bother with updates unless something changed. Mia would hear gunfire if the moment came. For now, the silence meant more than any report. Every second she bought, every shot she withheld, mattered. Far overhead and sweeping wide behind the ridgeline, Mia pushed the Apache hard through a narrow channel cut by erosion and time. The rotors skimmed close to the rock wall, less than 2 car lengths above the edge. Her co-pilot called out elevation shifts, terrain markers, airspeed. She adjusted in quarter-degree increments, just enough to stay masked from the far ridge. The cockpit glowed dim green. Her HUD was marked with overlay targets from earlier blinking heat signatures that were slowly cooling under the rising dust. But it was Riley's voice, steady and unshaken, that kept her focused. She knew that tone. It was the sound of someone spending every second wisely. Back on the ridge, Riley drew a breath and rolled to a second firing position 2 feet left. It gave her slightly less elevation but a better angle on the low path. She laid down a piece of shredded tarp in the original position, weighted it with her empty mag, and left a spent shell casing to catch the light. Then she waited. The wind shifted again. Not enough to matter at her current range, but enough to carry the smell of scorched metal. Below, another figure moved barely a flicker behind the outcrop. Riley took a breath and let it out slow. Her finger never touched the trigger. Too far left. Wait. She could feel the time stretching now. Not dragging, but pulling each second long. Elastic. Fragile. Her back ached. Her right hand was stiff. Her breathing stayed level. Viper 2. Echo 1. One target at my 6. Moving east. Possible spotter team. No clear shot. Mia's voice returned instantly. Logged. I see your IR mark. Stay cold. Riley didn't answer. She adjusted slightly and moved her pointer across the rocks, sweeping it over a shallow dip. The return fire she expected didn't come, but the moment someone flinched, she would know. In the Apache, Mia marked the point and confirmed range, still below line of sight, still minutes out. The desert terrain was cutting her path into tight angles and timed exposures. She couldn't just appear over the ridge. If she did it wrong, she'd expose herself to shoulder-fired missiles or worse. She had to come in under their radar, through the terrain, on Riley's timing. Back on the ridge, Riley could hear a voice. It was faint, broken by static. Probably a field commander giving instructions. Too far to hit, but close enough that they believed they were winning ground. She reached into her pouch and touched the cloth wrap with the 5 emergency rounds. She didn't pull them out, just touch them. Reassured herself they were still there. A new footstep scuffed the gravel, this time much closer. Riley slid the rifle half an inch to the right, leaned into the scope, and saw the edge of a shoulder against the sand-colored stone. She waited. The shoulder shifted forward. 1 round, clean, straight through. The body dropped silently. Riley slid back into shadow and changed positions again. The shell casing near her elbow had rolled against her glove. It was still warm from the shot, sharp against her wrist. It reminded her she was still in control. Echo 1, this is Viper 2. I have visual on your sector. 1 minute to turn. Riley adjusted her scope and answered, Copy. Still holding. Flanks delayed. Let me know when you're in position to break them. Will do. You've held them long enough. Riley exhaled through her nose and lowered her head slightly. Not long enough. Just long enough for someone like Mia to take it from here. The air changed before the sound arrived. Riley could feel the shift first. Something subtle in the wind pattern. The tremble in the sand. The pressure between her shoulder blades. The ridgeline behind her began to shudder softly. Not from explosives, but from rotor wash creeping over stone. Then came the noise steady, deliberate, low and growing. The Apache broke into view without warning, dipping over the southern rise at an angle so sharp it looked almost like a glide. Blades thundered through the desert air, kicking dust into spirals as the gunship leveled out into a long, slow arc above the valley. Riley didn't look up. She didn't need to. She kept her eye in the scope and shifted her IR pointer across the burned edge of a gutted vehicle, holding the beam steady on a ridge just beyond. 2 targets moving across Saddle Ridge, she said into the radio, her voice flat. Marking lead. Recommend cannon pass, northeast to southwest. The Apache responded not with words, but action. A stream of 30mm rounds chewed through the edge of the rocks seconds later, sending chunks of debris outward like shrapnel. The lead figure collapsed sideways. The second tried to scramble back and was caught mid-turn. Smoke trailed along the ridge now, curling into the dry air. Splash confirmed. Mia said, Paint next. Vehicle. North edge. Behind debris pile. Still live. Recommend hellfire. Marking now. Riley moved her pointer slightly, the beam flickering against a crushed section of steel plate. Through her scope, She caught a flash of motion, someone attempting to climb into the front seat of the armored vehicle, hands gripping the edge of the doorframe. Target attempting escape. Vehicle active. Target acquired. Mia replied. Laser lock, firing one. Riley shifted her aim slightly right and dropped a figure who emerged from the rear side of the vehicle just before the missile arrived. The blast lifted the vehicle 6 feet off the ground. A plume of black smoke surged upward as fire rolled across the wreckage. Riley rolled back from the scope to blink out grit, then resumed her position. The concussion hadn't rattled her. She had already braced for the delay. East slope, she called. Light infantry trying to reposition. 5-man group, staggered spacing. I'll mark rear. I've got the front adjusting angle. Mia banked left and came in lower, her HUD pulsing with thermal signatures. She saw the IR flare pop once against the far rocks, barely a shimmer, but enough to cue her position. She let the gun track the opposite edge, squeezing off controlled bursts that chased the lead contact across open ground. Riley's shot cracked a half-second later, clipping the tail scout who had stopped to return fire. They didn't speak after that. There was no need. Riley scanned, marked, tracked. Mia scanned, locked, fired. They began to move as if part of the same fire control system. A target would blink into view for 1 second, barely visible in the haze, or darting through scattered wreckage, and one of them would react. Sometimes both, in perfect sync. Another voice came across the convoy net, one of the forward platoon sergeants calling for relief to shift positions. Riley heard it but ignored it. She had no orders for ground forces, only one focus. Mia's Apache passed overhead again, this time banking hard and sending a cloud of grit over Riley's perch. She blinked once but didn't move. West crest, she said. 2 vehicles inbound, speeding, light armor, dust trail visible. Tracking. Mia answered. Laser mark. Stand by, waiting for clear rear. Mia understood. Infantry sometimes rode low behind those vehicles to avoid being marked. If she fired too early, the payload might leave collateral damage. So she waited. Seconds passed. Then Riley's voice returned. Mark clean, target open. Locked, firing 2. The first missile struck between the vehicles, catching both in the blast radius. The second followed a half-second later, burning through the lead vehicle's frame and detonating its rear compartment. Both transporters folded inward, fire rolling through them like torn paper. Mia brought the Apache out wide and angled her next approach lower. From her elevation, she could see the rest of the enemy force breaking. They had held their positions for 15 minutes, confident in numbers, ground, and surprise. But now their confidence cracked. She saw fighters running, others trying to dig into new positions behind cover that no longer meant anything. Do you see that ridge left of the dry wash? Riley asked. They're trying to regroup. Top of the slope. 4 contacts in wedge formation. I see them. No clear shot yet. I can draw one out. Go. Riley reached for her flare tube and fired one short pop across the open space between her and the ridge. The lead figure turned, exposed for one breath. That was enough. Mia's rounds tracked him first, and Riley cut the second runner who froze after the first blast. Dust was now filling the valley in sheets. Smoke trailed upward. Shadows rippled across the ridgeline as heat distorted the shapes of rocks and broken vehicles. Riley chambered another round and waited. No targets moved. Echo 1, Mia said, her voice quieter now. I think that's your ridge again. Clear enough. Holding for movement. Mia let the Apache circle once more. Her HUD showed only residual heat. Her sensor sweep pulsed blank. She could hear the breathing of her co-pilot now. The fight wasn't over, but this part of it was under control. You still up? Mia asked. Still up, Riley replied. No emotion, just 2 voices, steady and synced. Neither woman had ever met the other. But for 9 straight minutes, across one broken stretch of sand and heat, their aim had become the same. The final push came in staggered waves. 2 trucks on the western road appeared first, their engines loud over the hum of residual fire. They carried no mounted weapons, just speed and bodies, packed tight in the back with rifles raised. Behind them, scattered infantry attempted to keep pace on foot, firing sporadically as they closed the distance to the valley floor. The dust they kicked up formed a gray curtain that briefly masked their approach. Riley marked the lead vehicle with her IR pointer but didn't speak. She waited until the second truck pulled even, trying to flank wide left. Then she keyed her mic. 2 trucks, 10 seconds from convoy perimeter. Paint is hot. Mia's Apache adjusted course immediately. The chain gun fired in short, measured bursts, walking rounds up from the rear of the convoy toward the moving vehicles. The first truck swerved under pressure, but caught a direct hit across the engine block. Fire burst from beneath the hood, and the vehicle rolled onto its side, skidding to a stop against a low berm. The second tried to brake, jerking right in the dust trail of the first. That hesitation was all Mia needed. One missile dropped from the wing and struck just forward of the cab. The blast scattered the truck into parts. Riley tracked 2 infantry figures who emerged from the wreckage and moved for cover behind a downed section of barrier. One raised a launcher. She squeezed off her last round and caught him through the side. The other crawled low and disappeared. Riley didn't follow. Her bolt locked open. She slid her rifle onto its sling and reached into her pouch. 1 round remained, wrapped in cloth. She unrolled it and turned it once in her hand but didn't load it. She held it loosely between 2 fingers, the brass catching a flick of sunlight through the grit. Below her, the smoke had thickened. Fires burned low in the valley. Blackened metal frames stood where armored transports had been. Their wheels melted to slag and their hatches twisted open. No movement came from them now. The convoy had scattered but held formation. Survivors crouched behind cover, weapons still up, waiting for the all-clear. The radio was quiet. Mia's Apache swept in from the north and hovered low over the far ridge. Her gun tracked the slope where the last of the enemy had retreated minutes earlier, but there was no more fire, no movement, no challenge. She circled once, scanning slowly. Fuel was low, but the pattern was deliberate. Riley watched the gunship make a wide arc across the sky, the rotors kicking dust from the peaks, the belly of the craft pulsing faint heat in the afternoon light. Riley stood, body stiff from holding low for too long. Her knees cracked as she moved. Her uniform was streaked with dirt and soot. The edge of one sleeve was torn, and her vest bore a shallow groove from a round that had struck too close. She stepped down from her hide, boots sliding across the rock face with controlled momentum. She moved through the space she had defended for the last hour, past broken casings and bits of stone cracked by return fire. Her fingers still curled lightly around the final round. At the base of the ridge, she slowed. One of the Marines from the convoy team waved to her, calling something she didn't catch. She gave a nod, small and non-committal, and kept walking toward the scattered remains of the kill zone. Above, Mia finished her final sweep. Her co-pilot leaned forward slightly, hand resting on the throttle. "Valley looks clear," he said, voice low. Mia said nothing. She brought the aircraft into a hover for 3 long seconds, nose tilted slightly toward the direction Riley had been. There was no visible signal, no salute, no radio call, but the hover lingered just long enough to be understood. Then the Apache banked left and disappeared behind the ridge. Riley watched the bird vanish. The sky was quiet again. The gunfire had stopped. The dust had begun to settle in uneven patches across the battlefield, clinging to every surface, softening the edges of the burned-out vehicles. The heat shimmered across the rocks, bending the horizon ever so slightly. She opened a canteen and took one slow sip, then looked again at the round in her hand. She rolled it between her fingers once more before slipping it back into the pouch. She would not waste it. Behind her, the Marines had started to regroup. Someone was taking roll. Someone else was calling for casevac. Riley didn't join them yet. She moved instead toward the edge of the kill zone, where the brush thinned and the ridge fell into shadow. Her face was calm, her body still. The radio remained clipped to her shoulder. The line was quiet. No words came through it now. She didn't expect any, and she didn't need them. Riley sat with her knees drawn up in the dust, elbows resting on them, fingers loosely clasped around the strap of her pack. Her rifle lay beside her, untouched since she had cleared the ridge. The canteen was half full, but she hadn't reached for it again. The air was quieter now, but the wind still carried faint smoke from the wreckage down below. Her face was streaked with soot and dried sweat, and her uniform bore the marks of crawling across stone and sand. She looked like someone who had been through a fire and walked out the other side without letting it touch her core. A Humvee approached slowly from the western trail. It stopped a few yards away, and 2 Marines climbed out. One of them, a corporal no older than 20, stepped toward her with a cautious expression. He started to say something about the shot count, or how the kill zone held. She didn't look up right away. When she finally did, it was only to nod once. He stopped talking, nodded back, and didn't press it. She stood, slow but steady, slung her rifle, and walked to the vehicle. As she climbed in, she reached into her vest and slipped the final round back into its cloth wrap. It hadn't been fired. That meant something. Miles away, Mia set the Apache down at the forward airstrip with practiced precision. The rotors began to slow as she switched off the primary systems. One by one, her co-pilot sat back, pulling off his gloves, ready to say something. She unplugged her headset first, removed her helmet, and stepped out onto the tarmac without a word. Her hands were streaked with dust and engine oil from earlier checks, and she wiped her face once with the inside of her arm. She walked the length of the Apache alone, touching the fuselage with one hand as she passed beneath the wing. No one else spoke to her. The airfield wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. She checked the maintenance log, scrawled her signature across the form, and returned the clipboard to the hook by the ready room door. She didn't sit. She didn't linger. She carried her helmet by the strap, letting it bump softly against her leg as she crossed the tarmac. Back in the valley, Riley moved with the rest of the recon element toward the exfil point. She walked alone, slightly apart from the others, but not distant, just quiet. A low wind cut across the pass, stirring the dust again. Overhead, the steady pulse of rotor blades grew from faint to full as the Apache made one last pass above them. No banking flare, no engine roar, just a single shadow crossing the ground. Riley looked up, just once. Then the gunship vanished beyond the ridgeline, and the sky returned to silence. Neither of them said goodbye. Neither of them needed to.